And the only downside I'll say of Usha is I asked the convention planners, I said, what about having my wife introduce me before my speech? I'm not making that mistake ever again.
J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the USA, and his beloved wife Usha Vance, the second lady, attended a program at Washington. Big players filled the room, including the president himself. Suddenly, something happened unexpectedly. A speech by Usha Vance sent a buzz through the room.
It occurred to me that there was only one thing to do.
An embarrassment felt by J.D. Vance in front of everyone.
And yeah, Usha's more sophisticated in the ways of the world, but I think what sort of unites them is, one, they're very tough.
Was it a joke, a jab, or a hint at something deeper? Let's find out. Usha Vance stepped up to the podium. Until that moment, she had been in the background, but as soon as she took the microphone, the room went silent. She was smart, composed, and deeply respected. But she rarely spoke in public, making this moment even more important. J.D. stood beside Trump, nodding as she began. He expected a speech about family, patriotism, or their journey together, something safe, something rehearsed. Instead, her first sentence changed everything. A ripple went through the room. Trump, standing relaxed with his hands clasped, tilted his head slightly. J.D., still smiling, blinked. Just once. It wasn't panic, not yet, but there was something. Usha's words weren't harsh, but they had an edge. A joke that didn't land softly. A truth spoken too plainly. Suddenly, the most powerful man in the room, the Vice President of the United States, looked uncomfortable. The silence stretched longer than it should have. J.D. wasn't sure how to react, and beside him, Trump was watching. J.D. had prepared for everything except this. Usha smiled, confident, thanking the crowd. J.D. nodded, expecting a warm story about their journey, maybe a mention of faith, hard work, or patriotism. Then, she took a turn. "People ask me how I feel about my husband becoming vice president," she said, her voice warm but firm. "Honestly, it's a little surreal. This is the same man who once told me he wasn't sure he even wanted to be in politics. That government was too messy, too ugly, and yet, here we are." Soft laughter. J.D.'s smile held, but something inside him tensed. She wasn't wrong, he had been unsure about politics, but why bring that up now? Usha continued, "I've had a front row seat to J.D. Vance's evolution. The writer, the commentator, the senator, and now the vice president. It's been quite a journey, especially for someone who once told me, 'I'm not sure I'd survive in Washington without you keeping me sane.'" More laughter, a little too loud, a little too knowing. J.D. forced a grin. He glanced at Trump, whose expression remained unreadable, but he had noticed. "And I'll be honest," Usha added, giving J.D. a playful but pointed look. "I still don't know if Washington is ready for J.D., or if J.D. is ready for Washington." The room reacted. A murmur. People are shifting, sharing glances. What just happened? J.D. felt the weight of Trump's presence beside him. The way the room hung on those words. Subtle, but just enough to plant a question in people's minds. Was she teasing her husband? Or was she saying something others had been too afraid to? And why did it feel like this would be the moment everyone remembered? Cameras clicked, the only sound in the room. Trump shifted slightly beside him. Not much, but enough. He wasn't laughing, just watching, calculating. J.D. knew exactly what that meant. Trump was deciding whether this was just a passing comment or something worth remembering. Usha, still at the podium, was unfazed. "I say that with love," she added smoothly. "J.D.'s a quick learner, though I do wonder if he ever misses being a best-selling author instead of, well, you know." Louder laughter. J.D. chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He knew how narratives spun out of control. This was supposed to be a controlled event, a positive image for the new administration. Now, thanks to a few well-placed words, the media had something new to discuss. Would they call it playful banter, or something more? Trump finally broke his silence, chuckling under his breath. "Well, he's got a good woman keeping him in line," he said, just loud enough for the room to hear. A throwaway comment on the surface. But to J.D., it felt like a test, a reminder. Usha met Trump's gaze, still smiling. "I try." More laughter, more cameras, more speculation. J.D. needed to recover from this, fast, because whether Usha meant to or not, she had given Washington something it loved. A reason to talk. The applause after Usha's speech was polite, but not as enthusiastic as it should have been. Not for the second lady, not for a newly elected administration. Trump gave JD a small smirk. The kind that said, "I caught that." The kind JD had seen before in debates, in meetings, when Trump was filing something away for later. JD knew how Washington worked. This wouldn't be a scandal, it wouldn't make headlines, but it wouldn't be forgotten. These were the moments that lingered, the inside jokes in political circles, the quiet tests of a leader's strength. JD had been embarrassed, no doubt about it. Usha walked back toward him, calm, composed, completely unaware or completely aware of what she had just done. JD gave her a brief, practiced smile. "Well, that was interesting," Trump murmured, just loud enough for JD to hear. JD chuckled lightly, pretending he didn't feel the weight of the remark. "She keeps me on my toes!" Trump smirked, then turned back to the stage. The event continued, but JD knew better. There were two kinds of political missteps, ones that caused an immediate firestorm, and ones that quietly chipped away at your standing over time. This was the second kind, and those were the ones that really mattered. One thing was clear, that Usha had just embarrassed JD Vance in front of everyone. JD had spent enough time in Washington to recognize when he was being tested. Trump didn't react right away, and that was the part JD didn't like. If the president had laughed, shrugged it off, or made a joke, JD could have moved on. But instead, Trump had simply watched, and that was worse. The event continued, but JD felt the weight of what had happened. Conversation still flowed, but some guests snuck glances his way. Reporters whispered, debating whether Usha's comments were worth writing about. JD glanced at his wife. She was chatting casually, at ease, as if she hadn't just sent a ripple through the night. Had she meant to do that? Or was this just Usha being Usha, sharp, confident, unfiltered? Trump finally leaned over, his voice low. "That was a great speech." The night carried on, but JD knew the conversation wasn't over. Usha was back to mingling, unaware or completely aware of the weight of her words. JD kept shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. But beneath it all, his mind was elsewhere. Trump had a long memory, especially when it came to moments of weakness. And whether Usha meant it as a joke or not, that's exactly how this could be seen. On the ride home, JD was already thinking about damage control. An interview? A social media post? Or was it smarter to say nothing at all? As they stepped into the car, Usha finally looked at him. "You okay?" JD gave her a smile, the kind politicians give when they don't want to answer. "Of course. It was a great speech." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, turning to look out the window. JD stared out too, knowing Washington wouldn't forget this moment. Not today, not ever. Thank you for watching. Please leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.